ability to measure brand lift. I mean, what if you could really understand how these campaigns were affecting your brand, and not just sort of after the fact by doing a post-campaign analysis, but actually understanding in real time how your campaign, how every single ad is impacting your brand lift. So we've recently crunched some data on a travel advertiser, and we found that advertisers or users that were exposed to the ad versus not exposed resulted in a 93% uplift in traffic to that user's site, to that advertiser's site, which of course in and of itself is really, really wonderful. And of course this isn't a big surprise, right? We all understand and we know that online advertising works. We know that display works. I think what's different is now the ability to really measure this stuff in real time, to not have to do after the fact studies, but to understand while your campaign's running what's happening in terms of this kind of lift. We're also, I think, starting to finally get beyond the advertiser's site, right? Traffic to your site is one great measure, but an example of looking beyond an advertiser's site is we can now actually measure lift in branded search terms resulting from display campaigns. And we can actually look even further than that and look at sites that are related to the advertiser's site. So recently we worked with a mobile manufacturer, and we found that we're actually able to get 18% lift from a display campaign to product review sites. We're also able to get a 15% lift to the carrier's site, the carrier that was working with the mobile advertiser. And we're actually able to also find a 29% lift in branded search terms for the carrier. So these are good examples of how a display campaign is delivering much, much more than just clicks, right? And in a separate case, we're actually able to see that with a retailer, we saw 120% lift in branded search terms that we're able to attribute directly to their display campaign. So for me, the idea of getting beyond clicks, understanding the totality of the effect of the display campaign is a really exciting trend that's happening in the industry, and there's lots of cool technology that is finally making that much, much more possible. All right, so let's talk a little bit about sort of deeper level conversions and moving down the funnel a little bit. Any marketer that I work with would love to understand much, much more than the ROI of their campaign, obviously. They'd like to understand what is driving that ROI. And we've developed a statistical approach to really attribute conversions to display campaigns better than ever. And essentially what this means is looking at conversions that happen due to exposure and not just due to a click. We recently found an advertiser that had 3,000 conversions, and only 19% of those conversions were attributable to a click. And for the same advertiser, 86% of their conversions actually were the result of exposures that there was no click involved whatsoever. So not only did they not click and convert, but they actually never clicked on the ad in the first place. So understanding all of these relationships, I think, is a really key opportunity. And I think valuing view-through conversions is really critical to understanding the performance and indeed valuing a display campaign online. And I think it goes further than that. If we can understand the elements of a campaign that are driving the ROI, is it the ad unit? Is it the audience? Is it the pricing? Really understanding these things and the components of a campaign gives us much, much more interesting and richer data to be able to optimize off of. So again, attribution and view-through conversions and any kind of post-click conversion or non-click conversion is an area where we're seeing a lot of development from a technological front. The other area that I think is pretty interesting is this idea of getting beyond online, in fact. So we've talked about attribution for online, meaning search and display, but how do we correlate and how do we attribute for things like print and TV, right? And how do we think about these campaigns collectively? So we recently did a study for a large CPG advertiser who had actually run TV, radio, print, outdoor, but also ran a display campaign including YouTube. And we used sort of a pretty complex cross-channel model and learned a few things. The first thing we learned is that the YouTube portion of the campaign actually added 2.6% incremental reach to the TV. So we reached people that were not reached otherwise on TV. And more importantly, 25% of that reach was actually folks on YouTube that had never even seen the TV ad. So this is a good example of how these two things can work together. And to me, it's become increasingly apparent that traditional and digital marketers need to work more closely together. Running a TV campaign, running a print campaign, using those potentially to drive traffic to a site, thinking about how to remarket off of that traffic. These are all very interrelated activities. In my mind, any dollar that is spent on media, whether it's a billboard, a print ad, or a television ad, or even direct mail, any dollar that is spent to drive traffic to a site should be understood in terms of the overall funnel management of that site. Any traffic that is coming to a site, whether it's paid for or organic, whether it's online or offline, can be remarketed against. Understanding how to feed the top of the funnel and how to leverage that funnel into remarketing is really fundamental to making display and indeed online advertising more productive. Another big area that I think is evolving and is going to be really, really interesting is obviously this idea of offline sales. And it's kind of the final frontier, and it's definitely not an easy problem. But it seems like the ultimate goal of a marketer is to get a comprehensive view of what is driving sales. It doesn't really matter to them whether it's online or offline. It doesn't matter whether the sales are taking place online or offline. A marketer wants a comprehensive view. So today we've been doing some geographic and geo-based random experiments. And what we're trying to do is measure store-level sales as a result of a display campaign. So, of course, this is going to be a very difficult nut to crack. This is not an easy thing to figure out. But there's a lot of smart people working on the problem, both at Google and in the industry. And we're seeing from big marketers, big traditional marketers, folks with big retail stores, all of them are very, very interested in this problem. And I talked at the beginning about the idea of dollars moving online with consumers. I think this is a really big lever for the online space. And it's an opportunity to measure our campaigns much more holistically, right? If you're running search or you're running display or you're doing any kind of digital campaign, and those campaigns are driving conversions in store, that's really, really useful information. That's really important to understand. It's really important to understand how different campaigns might yield different kinds of results, just as you would online, but also now in the offline space. So the last area I wanted to talk about is social. I think everybody would agree that the social web has really changed the world and really changed how we live in it and how we live on the web in particular. 59% of users on the web engage in social networks every month, and that number is just growing very, very, very quickly. And this, of course, has resulted in a huge, huge power shift to the consumer. Consumers have more of a voice. They can express opinion. They can talk about how they like brands or don't like brands online. They can share products, et cetera, et cetera. Marketing, I think initially was a one-way conversation. I think with the advent of the internet, it started to become a two-way conversation. And I think with social media, it started to become sort of a multi-way conversation. Whether you like it or not, whether you're engaged or not, your consumers are having a conversation about your brand, and it's happening in the social environments. And this, of course, is going to create just limitless opportunities for marketers to engage with and interact with consumers. So, as I mentioned, it's pretty early days, but I think there's sort of three key applications that we're starting to see evolve that I wanted to share with you, or things that we think are most promising. I think the first is the idea of including social elements in actual ad units, right? You can allow someone to share an ad potentially. You could allow someone to like or not like an ad potentially. And I think that is going to be a powerful concept. And strangely enough, people actually do this stuff today pretty manually. I was thinking of an example last night. I recently saw an ad for DirecTV that runs in America, and it's a really, really wacky ad. It's very, very funny. And immediately when I saw this ad on television, I thought it was funny, so I went to YouTube. Immediately I found the ad. I watched the ad. I then took the URL from the ad, went to my Facebook page, made a post, and actually took some time, not long, but 30 seconds, just said, hey, I thought this ad was funny, this is what I thought was funny about it, and I shared it with all my friends. And then I was actually quite surprised, but I think because the ad was so funny, like a lot of my friends commented, and obviously I'm in the media business, but most of my friends aren't. So I was actually surprised that folks that have nothing to do with advertising just, they thought this ad was funny, they thought this ad was interesting, they shared it with other people. They wrote back that they laughed out loud when they saw the ad, et cetera, et cetera. So this is a situation today where I'm basically manually doing all of this work, right? If I see that ad, I should just be able to do that. It should be inherent to the ad. And think about how much more powerful an ad becomes when you discover it in the manner that I just described, through a friend's endorsement. Think about the viral aspects and the ability to have an ad run around the internet without you having to pay for it. I mean, it's just a very, very powerful concept. And I think that functionality is going to emerge pretty quickly that will allow people to do this. The second application here is, I think, understanding the social graph. Users can publicly declare their affinity to a brand. They can share their preferences for a product with a friend. And this essentially creates lots and lots of data. And I think what we'll see in the coming years is that the most savvy advertisers will figure out very, very smart ways to use these signals, because every time I'm doing something like this, I'm sending a signal that an advertiser can potentially use. So I think the use of the social graph is going to be another big dimension as we expand our use of social. And savvy advertisers will find clever ways to leverage that. And then the last, which is pretty obvious, is just that social networks are empowering advertisers or consumers to give advertisers or marketers and product makers feedback in real time. So just the ability to be able to rate a restaurant, for example, right? There's a really popular application that I like a lot called Foursquare. And every time I go to a restaurant now, I check into that restaurant and I'm able to read tips from other people that have been to that restaurant, and they've just essentially left bits of information there. So this is really, really powerful for an advertiser. I mean, the idea that you could actually know who's consuming your product, know what they're saying about your product, as a restaurateur understanding what people are leaving as tips for other consumers, don't eat this, do eat that, I think is really, really powerful information. So that's sort of it for the social networking space. I think these three applications are going to evolve pretty quickly in the coming years. So just before I jump into a couple more interesting examples, I'll summarize what I talked about. I think we're on the tipping point of a really fundamental revolution in display advertising. I think that's driven by four key things.